Good morning, and it's my privilege to be interviewing Becky McMinn, who's a nurse practitioner at Weston Park Hospital here in Sheffield. Um, Becky, what was it like being a nurse in the early months of this year?
Good morning, Paul. So nurse practitioner at Weston Park is my main role is seeing patients ahead of their cancer treatment, and also it's a fairly new role at Weston Park, so it's been also a bit of service development as well. So early in the year, when the pandemic became a reality in Sheffield and we were expecting an increase in numbers, a certain number of roles in the nursing kind of field were deemed as non-essential and could be paused for a few months, and I fell into that category. So in March I undertook some pandemic nurse training basically, and we were told that we would be possibly moved to anywhere in the trust to work, and that at the time was really quite tough. So as a team of nurses, the rest of the country were in lockdown, and we were turning up to Weston Park not sure whether we would be based that day at Weston Park or whether we'd be asked to spend the next few months at the Northern or at the Hallamshire, and that came with its stresses. And although we weren't busy, people were really upset. People were quite tearful quite a lot of the time. So that was the first few weeks of me, nursing in the pandemic times. After then, the decision was made that I would remain at Weston Park, and the role I had was to cover sickness within the hospital. So I'd turn up at work and just work on whichever department I was needed. Things changed daily over those first few weeks, whether it would be where you'd be based, how we operated each day. Everything went telephone. So much went to telephone assessments within Weston Park. And those first few weeks, we didn't have face masks. It was felt that the patients that we were seeing at Weston Park were not going to have coronavirus. So therefore, we could just, to an extent, be as normal as we could be with those patients, but trying to social distance from colleagues. Sadly at that time, a lot of people did go off sick during those first few weeks in the departments I was in.
And then you yourself contracted the virus. How badly affected were you, Becky?
Yeah, so it was mid-April. One Sunday, I suddenly started with quite a bad headache. Things at home were a little bit stressful, so I thought it was just down to a bit of stress headache, and went to work the next day, couldn't shake it off, and developed developed a temperature with it. Was sent home, was tested. Test actually came back negative, so we thought, well, maybe it's just one of these things, another cold I've picked up. But actually I didn't improve. As a family, we were still advised to continue to isolate, as they were feeling there was some false negative tests coming back. And after about a week, so for me, it's being sick. I'm not good at being sick, and I was frustrated. I was losing my energy. I was developing increased breathlessness, and on the Tuesday, a week after I was initially off, so been off about 8 days, my breathing was really quite bad, and I was awake all that night, just really scared. I lay in bed thinking, well, yeah, it was just a very scary time. I saw the GP the next day, and she was very good. She checked my oxygen levels, and one of the things that we discovered was that my oxygen levels were dropping as soon as I did any exercise, and at that point she was quite concerned about this, and there was this discussion that then as to whether and at what point I would potentially need to be thinking about going into hospital, and whether that would be a best course of action for me. It was really scary. It was a really scary time. I had a friend who's a GP who offered me an oxygen monitor that I could use. She was actually off on maternity leave, and the GP at the time I was seeing was happy with that plan, felt that being at home would be the best place for me, as long as they could contact me regularly and I could monitor my oxygen levels at home. And that's, so that was where things were left after I saw the GP on the Wednesday. And really fortunately, I was able to stay at home. Stable, my oxygen levels remained stable, they didn't deteriorate, and things slowly improved. And it was a real lesson in patience, and my body not improving as quickly as it ever has done. The tiredness was massive. I was off work for just over a month, and then had a very slow phased return, was on light duties for quite a few weeks. And things a lot more back to normal kind of end of July, beginning of August in terms of how I was feeling. So it was an interesting few months of being unwell, and then but actually getting better.
Well, a very tough few months. You spoke there, Becky, about learning lessons in patience. Were there other lessons that you learned through that period and in looking back at it?
Yes, a couple of things that I learnt. And I think two things. So very initially, those very early days when staff who I was working with were quite upset and struggling, and they would talk about things at home, not being able to get food, queuing the supermarket after a shift, and just the exhaustion that they were feeling and not being able to get pasta, and hearing them and listening to them, and actually how can I be a Christian at work, and one day I was able to get hold of some pasta and some tins of beans, and when I got into work with these really simple items, it was like I'd brought a gold gift to them. And it was just this, that was a really special moment of thinking, how can I be how can we be loving in the midst of actually what's a really tough time for everyone. And then actually, what did I learn myself? I spent a lot of time on my own thoughts during that, whilst I was unwell, and you can't make sense of all that's going on. Couldn't make sense of it, and so much about my faith, being a Christian, I spent a lot of time thinking, what do I believe, and why do I believe it? And the analogy that's been used quite a bit about a little boat and like big waves and the storm, and me feeling that at times that's how life felt, making plans for if I got admitted to hospital, the boats felt like potentially it could go sailing, of course, but actually where was my anchor? Was there an anchor? And actually my anchor was there, right, solidly in Jesus, and believing that he's my rock, and just that solid security in that. And I had some really good friends who just continued to point me to the promises of the Bible, and I listened to various podcasts on some Psalm devotions, which were just a real encouragement at the time when I just found reading just too exhausting. So I learned a lot, just interesting God in times that we just have no control in at all.
Becky, thank you so much for your honesty and for sharing that with us.